3 years ago, I stood in my backyard, staring at a clematis that had grown exactly 12 inches all summer. 12 inches. In a whole season, I had done everything the little plastic tag told me to do. I planted it against a nice sunny fence. I watered it every few days. I even talked to it, which I will deny if you ever ask me in person. And it just sat there sulking, while 3 doors down my neighbor Carol had a clematis so thick and so loaded with blooms that people slowed their cars down to look at it. Carol, bless her, waters her garden about half as often as I water mine. She does not have a greenhouse. She does not have some secret fertilizer flown in from Belgium. What she had and what I did not have was information. Small, specific, unglamorous information that nobody at the garden center ever bothers to tell you when they ring up your plant and send you on your way. It took me 3 full growing seasons to piece together why my vine was struggling and hers was thriving. And here is the thing I want you to understand right from the start of this video: none of what I am about to show you is specific to clematis. It does not matter if you are growing clematis, climbing roses, wisteria, jasmine, honeysuckle, mandevilla, or a trumpet vine, climbing up your porch post. Every single one of these plants is playing by the same basic rules, and almost nobody explains those rules out loud. By the time we get to trick number 4, you are going to understand exactly what went wrong in my garden for 3 years and exactly what changed it. Stick with me through all 7 because the order matters and the last few build on the first few. Why vines are different. Before we get into the list, I want to take 30 seconds to explain something because it changes how you will think about every single tip in this video. Most of the plants in your garden are self-supporting. A tomato plant, a hydrangea, a hosta, they hold themselves up. A climbing vine cannot do that. Evolution gave these plants a completely different survival strategy. Instead of building a thick, sturdy stem like a shrub or a tree, a vine puts almost all of its early energy into height, into reaching, into finding something to grab onto, because in the wild, the vine that reaches the sunlight first is the vine that survives. Everything else comes second. That single fact that a vine is at its core a plant obsessed with climbing before anything else is the reason most of the generic gardening advice you read online quietly fails you. Vines have different root needs, different pruning needs, different feeding needs, and different timing needs than the rest of your garden. Garden centers sell you the plant and a trellis and call it a day. Nobody explains the biology behind why that is not enough. So here are the 7 things I wish someone had told me 3 years ago. They apply whether you are growing clematis, roses, wisteria, jasmine, or honeysuckle. Let's get into it. Trick 1. Planting depth is not what you think. Here is where almost everybody starts off on the wrong foot. And it happens in the first 10 minutes of owning the plant before you have even had a chance to make a mistake with watering or feeding. Most gardeners plant a climbing vine exactly the way they plant everything else in the garden level, with the soil in the pot maybe an inch deeper if they are feeling generous. That instinct is correct for roughly 90% of what grows in your yard. For most climbing vines, it is wrong, and it is wrong in a way that will quietly hold the plant back for years without you ever knowing why. Here is the reasoning. Many climbing vines, clematis being the most famous example, are prone to a fungal disease that attacks the stem near the soil line. If the crown of the plant, that's the point where the roots meet the stem, sits right at the surface, a stressed or damaged plant can lose its entire top growth to this disease in a matter of days. Gardeners call it wilt, and it looks catastrophic. One week you have a healthy vine, the next week, it looks like someone poured boiling water on it. The trick nurseries in the UK have known for decades, and that is finally starting to spread here in North America, is to plant these vines 2 to 3 inches deeper than they sat in their nursery pot. Not the roots, the crown, that junction point. By burying it a few inches down, you give the plant a kind of insurance policy. If disease or damage ever takes out the top growth, there are dormant buds below the soil line that the plant can push new shoots from. The vine essentially gets a backup generator, but there is a second reason this matters just as much, and it applies to every vine on this list, not just clematis. A deeper root system stays cooler and more consistently moist through the heat of summer. Vines put enormous energy into root establishment in their first year, specifically because that root system has to support rapid, vigorous top growth later. A shallow planted vine spends its whole first summer, stressed by heat and drying out, and a stressed plant does not grow. It survives. That is the 12 inches of growth I got from my clematis. It was not growing, it was surviving, so here is your action step. When you plant any climbing vine this season, dig your hole 2 to 3 inches deeper than the nursery pot requires backfill with good compost-enriched soil and water it in generously. That single change done in the first 5 minutes of planting will do more for that vine's long-term health than almost anything you do afterward. Trick 2: pruning at the wrong time erases a whole year of blooms. This is the mistake that frustrates gardeners more than any other, because it feels completely reasonable when you're doing it. You look at your vine, it looks a little wild, a little overgrown, and your instinct, the same instinct that serves you well with most shrubs, tells you to grab the pruners and tidy it up. For a huge number of climbing vines, that instinct applied at the wrong time of year will cost you an entire season of flowers. Here is why climbing vines fall into different pruning groups depending on where they form their flower buds. Some vines, many varieties of Clematis, Forsythia-type climbers, and certain climbing roses bloom on what's called old wood. That means the flower buds for this coming spring were actually formed last summer on the growth that is already sitting there on your plant right now. If you prune that growth back in late winter or early spring because it looks messy, you are not tidying up the plant. You are cutting off every single flower it was about to produce. Other vines, many jasmine varieties, and a lot of modern repeat-blooming climbing roses bloom on new wood, meaning the growth that emerges this season. Those plants actually benefit from a harder prune in late winter because it stimulates the vigorous new growth that carries the flowers. I know this sounds complicated, and I promise it is simpler than it sounds once you know one rule of thumb. If your vine blooms early in the season before early summer, assume it flowers on old wood and prune it right after it finishes, blooming never in winter or early spring. If your vine blooms in mid to late summer, it is very likely flowering on new growth, and you can prune it back hard in late winter while it is still dormant. When in doubt, and I mean this, seriously wait until right after your vine blooms for the first time to do any significant pruning. You lose almost nothing by waiting, and you eliminate the single most common way people accidentally sabotage their own flowering vine. One more thing on pruning, because it matters for the shape and density of the plant, not just the flowers. Vines have a strong tendency to grow long and bare at the base, while all the leafy growth bunches up at the top chasing the light. That's called getting leggy, and it's exactly what happened to a rose. I grew for 2 summers gorgeous canopy of blooms up top, and underneath 6 feet of bare woody stem that looked like a broom handle, pinching the growing tips of young vines early in their life before they get tall forces the plant to branch out lower down. 10 minutes with your fingertips in the first year saves you from a permanently bare-legged vine for the rest of that plant's life. Trick 3. Your support structure is probably working against the plant. Every vine needs something to climb, and this is the part where I see the most well-intentioned mistakes. Climbing plants actually use 3 different mechanical strategies to climb, and if your support structure doesn't match the plant's strategy, the vine will struggle no matter how healthy it is underground. Twining vines like Wisteria, honeysuckle, and morning glory climb by wrapping their entire stem around a support in a spiral. These plants need something narrow enough to wrap around a pole, a wire, a slender post. Give a twining vine a wide, flat trellis panel, and it genuinely does not know what to do with it. It will flail around, looking for something to grab. Tendril climbers like sweet peas and many clematis varieties send out thin, curling tendrils that grab onto anything narrow nearby string wire, thin branches. These plants do best with a fine lattice or netting something with lots of small gripping points close together. Then, there are the clingers like climbing hydrangea and Boston ivy, which attach directly to a flat surface using tiny root-like holdfasts. These are the only vines that genuinely work well against a solid wall or fence panel. Here is the mistake almost everyone makes, myself included, for that first year. With the clematis, buying a generic trellis, the kind with wide wooden slats, spaced 6 or 8 inches apart, and expecting every kind of vine to climb it. A tendril climber cannot grip something that wide. It will grow up and over the trellis, but never actually attach to it. So the first strong wind of the season knocks the whole thing sideways. The fix costs almost nothing. For twining vines, use a simple pole or several vertical wires spaced a few inches apart. For tendril climbers, add plastic garden netting or even chicken wire over your existing trellis, something with gaps no wider than an inch or two for the tendrils to grab. For clingers, just give them the wall. And one practical tip that will save you a headache: tie the young growth loosely to your support with soft garden twine or Velcro plant ties for the first few weeks after planting. You are not restraining the plant, you are giving it a head start toward the support so it can find its own grip before it has to fend for itself. Trick 4. The one thing that actually changed my garden. Here it is, the one I promised you at the start of this video. There is an old piece of gardening wisdom specifically about clematis that says the plant wants cool feet and a warm face, sun on the leaves and flowers, shade and coolness at the roots. For years I assumed that was a quirky, plant-specific piece of trivia. It is not. It turns out, this principle applies to some degree to nearly every climbing vine, and once I understood why, I finally understood what had been wrong in my own garden for 3 years. Here is the biology. A climbing vine, because it is racing upward toward light rather than spreading out to shade its own base, the way a shrub does, very often leaves its own root zone completely exposed to direct sun. In the height of summer, the soil temperature at the base of an unshaded vine can climb well above what the root system can comfortably tolerate, sometimes 15 to 20 degrees hotter than soil that's shaded. Hot roots do not grow well. A plant with a stressed, overheated root system cannot support vigorous top growth no matter how much you water or feed it, because roots that are struggling to survive heat stress simply are not prioritizing growth. That was my clematis. I had planted it against a south-facing fence in full glorious sun, exactly like the tag told me. What the tag did not tell me was that the base of that plant baked all afternoon every single day, all summer long. The top of the plant wanted sun, the roots were being cooked. The fix is almost embarrassingly simple once you know it. You want the top growth of the vine reaching up into full sun, but you want the root zone shaded and cool. There are a few ways to accomplish this, and you do not need all of them, just 1 or 2. Plant a low, shallow-rooted perennial, or a ground cover in front of the vine's base, close enough that its leaves shade the soil. Something like a low hosta, a creeping thyme, or even a few annuals works well and does not compete seriously for water or nutrients. Use a 2 to 3 inch layer of mulch, and I mean a real layer, not a token sprinkle, extending well out from the base of the plant. This alone can drop root zone temperatures dramatically and also helps retain the consistent moisture these plants need. Position a large flat stone near the base. This is an old trick, but it genuinely works. The stone shades the soil directly beneath it and keeps a cooler, more stable root environment even through a heat wave. The year I finally shaded that clematis's roots with mulch and a couple of hostas planted right in front of it, that same plant that had grown 12 inches the year before put on nearly 6 feet of new growth and bloomed for the first time in 3 years. Same plant, same soil, same sun exposure on the leaves. The only thing that changed was the temperature at the roots. If you take away nothing else from this entire video, take away this one sun on the face, shade on the feet. It applies to clematis most famously, but climbing roses, jasmine, and honeysuckle all respond noticeably to a shaded, mulched root zone during the hottest months. Trick 5. You are probably feeding it wrong. Once your vine's roots are happy and its structure is right, feeding becomes the next lever, and this is another place where generic advice leads people astray. A lot of gardeners reach for a high-nitrogen all-purpose fertilizer because that is what's sitting on the shelf at the garden center, and nitrogen does produce fast, lush, green growth. For a climbing vine, especially a flowering one, too much nitrogen is almost a trap. It produces exactly what it sounds like, vigorous green leaves and long stems, but at the direct expense of flower production. The plant flush with easy nitrogen simply puts its energy into leafy growth instead of bothering to bloom. What flowering vines actually want is a fertilizer higher in phosphorus and potassium relative to nitrogen, something formulated for blooms rather than for foliage. Look for a fertilizer with a middle number noticeably higher than the first number on the bag. Feed established vines in early spring as new growth begins, and again lightly after the first flush of blooms if the plant is a repeat bloomer. Timing matters just as much as the formula. Feeding a vine heavily in late summer or early fall encourages a rush of tender new growth right before cold weather arrives, and that soft new growth is exactly what gets damaged by the first frost. Stop feeding by roughly mid to late summer in most zones, and let the plant naturally slow down and harden off for winter. Trick 6. Deep and infrequent beats, little and often. Watering habits are where good intentions quietly go wrong. A lot of gardeners give their vines a light sprinkle every day or two, which feels attentive and caring, but it actually trains the root system to stay shallow and close to the surface because that's where the water is. A shallow root system is a vulnerable root system. It dries out fast in a heat wave, and it cannot access the more stable moisture and nutrients deeper in the soil. What these vines actually want is a deep, thorough soaking once or twice a week rather than a shallow sprinkle every day. Water slowly at the base of the plant until the moisture has genuinely penetrated 6 to 8 inches down. Then let the top inch or two of soil dry out before watering again. This trains the roots to grow downward, searching for water, which builds exactly the kind of deep, resilient root system that supports vigorous climbing growth and helps the plant shrug off a stretch of hot, dry weather. A soaker hose or drip line at the base of the plant left, running for 20 to 30 minutes once or twice a week, does this far better than any amount of daily hand watering with a hose nozzle. Trick 7. Learn to spot stress before the plant looks bad. The last trick isn't a single action, it's a habit, and it's the one that ties everything else together. By the time a vine looks obviously unhealthy, yellowing leaves, wilting bare patches, it has usually been struggling for weeks. Vines communicate stress early in small, easy-to-miss ways, long before the damage becomes visible. Slowed growth compared to the same time last season, leaves that are slightly smaller or a little duller in color than they should be. New growth that seems to stall rather than reach forward. Get in the habit of walking past your vines every few days, not to do anything, just to look. Are they reaching? Are the newest leaves a good healthy color? Is the growth rate roughly what you'd expect for the season? Catching a subtle slowdown in early June gives you time to check the root zone temperature, adjust your watering, or add mulch before the plant is in real trouble. Waiting until August to notice a problem means you've usually lost most of that growing season, so let's go back to where we started. That clematis that grew 12 inches in an entire summer, the one that made me stand in my backyard wondering what I was doing wrong. Once I planted a replacement, the right depth, put proper netting on its support, instead of a wide slat trellis, shaded its roots with mulch, and a couple of hostas, switched to a bloom-focused fertilizer and started watering it deeply twice a week instead of lightly every day. That plant did not just recover, it became the thing neighbors slow their cars down to look at. 6 feet of growth in a single season, covered in blooms exactly like Carol's. None of these 7 changes cost much money. None of them require special tools or rare products. What they require is understanding what a climbing vine actually needs instead of treating it like every other plant in your yard. If you're growing clematis, climbing roses, wisteria, jasmine, honeysuckle, or anything else that climbs, these same 7 principles apply. Depth at planting, pruning at the right time for your specific bloom type, the right kind of support for how your vine actually climbs, shade at the roots, sun on the leaves, bloom-focused feeding, deep, infrequent watering, and learning to watch for the early quiet signs of stress before they turn into obvious problems. Tell me in the comments which vine you're growing and which of these 7 you didn't know before today. I read every comment on this channel, and it genuinely shapes what I cover next. And if there's someone in your life fighting with a sad, struggling vine of their own, send them this video. It might save them the 3 years it took me to figure this out. See you in the next one.